This episode of Wasteland may contain mature themes, profanity, and descriptions of sex, graphic violence, and criminal activity. Listener discretion is advised. I've driven on Interstate 4 a lot. It's the road that slashes across the center of Florida in a southwest direction from Daytona Beach all the way to Tampa. I-4 is one of those roads that most sane people will do anything to bypass. It's 132 miles of Floridian drivers, constant construction, and, because of both, horrendous traffic and frequent accidents. A 2017 report by the GPS tracking company Teletrack Navman named I-4 the deadliest highway in America. And the data to support it? There are 1.25 fatalities for every mile on I-4. Between 2016 and 2019 alone, the road lays claim to 150 traffic fatalities. Thankfully, there are other ways to get where you're going in Central Florida without having to merge onto this death trap of a road. Need to get from Daytona to the Orlando airport? Better to spend the extra hour and take I-95 south to Port St. John and get on 528 west, or the B line as it's known locally. The B line cuts through 2 wildlife preserves and puts you on State Road 417 just a few miles from the airport. It's a much safer drive and a more enjoyable one, even with 417's numerous tolls. Headed to Tampa? Well, I-4 is the most direct route. But if you can spare the extra time, State Road 44 will take you from Floridian coast to coast, and it's accessible about 10 miles south of Daytona, right off Interstate 95. Sure, it adds at least an extra hour to your trip because 44 terminates in Crystal River, a town about 80 miles north of Tampa. But you'll most likely burn that time in I-4 gridlock anyway, so why not spend that additional hour without the additional stress? You might have time to squeeze in an extra episode of your favorite podcast. Or this one. Unfortunately, there is one place that is only accessible via I-4. Let me rephrase. I'm sure there are smaller roads that can get you there with only minimal time spent on I-4. That is, if you know where to look. But the people headed to this particular place are, by and large, not interested in taking the scenic route. No, their destination is paramount, and their excited children in the back seat won't tolerate a single extra second spent confined in the car. Their destination? Walt Disney World. Listeners, before I continue, I feel the need for some clarity. Generally, I cover the traditional true crime topics, various bad people doing various bad things. But as I look to the future of this show, my list of potential episodes is growing, and so is the variety of topics. I would love to delve into urban legends or even the paranormal, just as long as it still reasonably fits under the Wasteland banner. I do, however, always promise to keep this show well within the shadowy realm that we true crime and horror junkies seem to enjoy so much. And bearing that in mind, there are few places that disturb me as much as Disney World. I understand that this topic may rub some of you the wrong way, and I'm sure it will test the loyalty of my meager audience. But this is a show about Florida's underbelly. As I said in my very first episode, the brighter the light, the darker the shadow. And for those of us who have witnessed a Disney World fireworks show, or seen the glow of Cinderella's castle lighting up the night sky, or been floored by the size of and the gleam of the lights coming from Epcot's spaceship Earth, the giant golf ball, we know that Walt Disney World is about as bright as it gets. I've lived in Florida for my entire life, 39 years, and I've been to Walt Disney World twice, Epcot once. And some people find this upsetting. Now, generally, I don't delve too deeply into my personal life on Wasteland, but I feel a bit of explanation is in order before I begin unpacking this topic. Disney World and Disney movies never really appealed to me as a child. I believe this is because when I was about 5 or 6, my parents, for some reason, allowed me to watch both The Godfather and Dirty Harry. Sure, I had an affinity for the Ninja Turtles and the Ghostbusters and the Thundercats too, but from a young age I always found I was entertained by darker fare. I was the only student in my elementary school who didn't know every word to Under the Sea from The Little Mermaid. I was, however, the only student who could quote Vito Corleone verbatim. For some reason, I had an affinity for the scene where he turns down Sollozzo the Turk's offer to bring the 5 families into the heroin business. I said I would see you because I heard you were a serious man, to be treated with respect. My classmates were nonplussed. That's not to say that some of the songs in Aladdin don't occasionally get stuck in my head, or that the one time I rode Thunder Mountain, I didn't enjoy myself. But Disney just isn't a big deal to me. To others, the park, the movies, and the culture surrounding both, it's a way of life. I guess I can understand the appeal. Disney is a world, no pun intended, where everything seems happy, pure, and innocent. A trip to Disney World, especially one where visitors fully commit to the vacation and stay at one of the resort hotels, is sort of like an all-expenses-paid cruise on land. One can fill their every childish whim and desire, and every inch of the landscape is created with imagination and enjoyment in mind. For over 50 years, Disney World has been my state's crown jewel, erected out of cheaply, some would say unfairly purchased Floridian swampland, to become an international destination. Today, the swamp that Disney World sits atop is long gone and buried. But there are some secrets that even the most magical place on Earth can't hide. The idea that the co-creator of Mickey Mouse, the creative brain trust behind the many parks and services that bear his name, the idea that Walt Disney was a Nazi, is often shrugged off as rumor and needless character assassination. It's the sort of stuff you would see in a cutaway gag on Family Guy. In truth, there exists no credible, concrete evidence that Walt himself was a member of the National Socialist German Workers' Party. But there is some proof that he was a Nazi sympathizer. In a 2017 article published on the website Paste, journalist Ryan Beatler refers to Walt as a, quote, quasi-Nazi. Beatler arrives at this conclusion by citing a few facts that, if they are true, would lead one to wholeheartedly agree with the title. The book Hitler's Doubles, written by Peter Fotis about Hitler's propensity for employing lookalikes and body doubles as political decoys, makes mention of the author encountering Walt Disney at a meeting of the German-American Bund, or the American Nazi Party, just after the conclusion of World War II. Disney was accompanied by his lawyer, Gunther Lessing, to that meeting and was surrounded by a host of Nazi-sympathizing Hollywood celebrities. The German-American Bund was a pro-Nazi organization comprised of only Americans of German descent. It was founded in 1936 and headed by Fritz Julius Kuhn, a native of Munich who had only become a U.S. citizen in 1934. The group established training camps in New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania, ostensibly to be ready for the imminent arrival of Hitler and the Nazis when they won World War II. The Bund held dramatic rallies and preached a message of anti-Semitism, though they were never fully embraced into the Nazi fold by Germany. One of the group's most notable gatherings was held at Madison Square Garden in 1939, where both the American flag and the Nazi flag were flown simultaneously. Leader Kuhn was eventually jailed for embezzling $14,000 from the Bund. The group never enjoyed much public support, and with the imprisonment and eventual deportation of Kuhn, the German-American Bund dissolved in 1941. Though this bit of lore is often dismissed by Disney fans, it wouldn't be the last time that Walt Disney would find himself voluntarily in the company of Nazis. In 1938, Walt Disney hosted German filmmaker Leni Riefenstahl at his Burbank animation studio. Riefenstahl was promoting her documentary on the 1936 Summer Olympics entitled Olympia. Some refer to Olympia as Nazi propaganda, citing the fact that the documented subject, the 1936 Summer Games, were held in Berlin under the governance of the Third Reich. Hitler had a new stadium and several gymnasiums built to showcase what he felt was the Reich's Aryan superiority in athletics. However, U.S. competitor Jesse Owens won 4 gold medals that year. And though Germany did take the most medals at the 1936 Summer Games, African-American Jesse Owens' victory was an embarrassment to Hitler and the entire Nazi Party. Riefenstahl is rumored to have quarreled with Nazi propagandist and architect of the Holocaust, Joseph Goebbels, over prominently featuring Owens in Olympia, which she managed to do. In this way, the film is at least not a total work of Nazi propaganda, but the same cannot be said for Riefenstahl's earlier film, 1935's Triumph of the Will. Triumph of the Will was commissioned by Adolf Hitler himself, and he serves as an executive producer, with his name appearing in the opening titles. The film is propaganda through and through, showcasing a myriad of Nazi images, including massive rallies at Nuremberg, Hitler addressing the Hitler Youth, parades of SA and SS forces, and Hitler arriving at the Nuremberg airport, his plane majestically descending out of the sky, the craft casting a crucifix-like shadow on the ground. Critics said the film truly showcased the Nazis' political religion, as in the eyes of many prominent Nazis, neither politics nor spirituality were mutually exclusive. It should be noted that mysticism and esotericism formed the basis for much of the Nazis' early ideology, though the more outlandish beliefs were eventually outlawed by Hitler. One of the party's earliest sponsors was the pro-Germanic Thule Society, who, it is said, believed that Aryans were descendants of a, quote, root race of giants, and could trace their origins to a lost landmass called Hyperborea, once located near Greenland. Triumph of the Will was a financial success and, at least in Germany, a critical one. Tellingly, there was a lack of outright anti-Semitism in the film, perhaps to ease its acceptance by the, as of then, unconverted German populace. When Leni Riefenstahl, who we can now accurately refer to as a Nazi propagandist, visited Walt Disney at his studio in Burbank, it was seen as a visit made in bad taste. Not only was Riefenstahl responsible for Triumph of the Will, but she arrived in California only a month after Kristallnacht. Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass, was the first pogrom of World War II. A pogrom is a violent riot, and in this case it was the first of many directed at German Jews. The name Kristallnacht translates to Crystal Night, and refers to the shards of broken glass covering the streets after the violence. It took place on November 9, 1938. Kristallnacht resulted in the deaths of at least 91 Jews, and approximately 7,500 Jewish businesses, homes, schools, hospitals, and cemeteries were destroyed or otherwise vandalized. Up until November 9th, Nazis had persecuted Jews through primarily economic and social means. Going forward, violence was the law of the day. Still, there was one positive outcome of Kristallnacht, and that was the realization by the rest of the world that Nazi Germany represented pure evil, and they had to be dealt with. Why Walt Disney would receive Leni Riefenstahl at all, much less after Kristallnacht, is a question that bears asking. Perhaps he was consulting with her for some tricks of the propaganda trade. When America entered World War II, Disney would eventually be contracted by the US government to produce his own anti-German propaganda films. Whatever the reason, this association with Nazis would continue to occur even after Walt's death. In 1971, when the famed Cinderella's Castle was erected at the Magic Kingdom in Orlando, 5 15-foot mosaics telling the unlikely princess's story were included on the walls of the structure. Their creator? Hans Gottlob Scharf, lead interrogator for the Nazi Airborne Division, the Luftwaffe, during World War II. Scharf was known for gleaning information from prisoners without using violence, and he was even invited to the US after the war to teach American forces his interrogation techniques. Scharf and his daughter-in-law Monica formed their own mosaic business and created mosaics for the California Capitol Building, the University of Southern California, Cinderella's Castle, and Epcot Center, located adjacent to the Magic Kingdom in Orlando, Florida. It may seem extraordinary that Scharf, a former Nazi, was allowed to emigrate to America and teach American troops Nazi techniques. But it has become common knowledge that after World War II, hundreds of Nazis with certain skill sets, particularly knowledge of advanced rocket propulsion, were welcomed into the US through the once clandestine Operation Paperclip. Many of these violent war criminals were employed by NASA and helped put Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin on the moon in 1969. While Scharf's tactics may be remembered as nonviolent, it should be asked, how many deaths occurred due to the information he was able to gather from the prisoners he interrogated? Just because he wasn't known to use a car battery or pliers to extract what he wanted, doesn't mean the information was any less damaging or deadly to the Allies during the war. But much like his cohorts who found their way to NASA, someone in America, a powerful someone, had a use for him, regardless of the misery he caused. As I said, Hans Scharf created mosaics for the entry ramps at Epcot Center, here in my home state of Florida. And that brings up an interesting point for me personally. For almost my entire life, I didn't realize that Epcot was an acronym. What does it stand for? Experimental Prototype Community of Tomorrow. The original plan for Epcot was much different than what was eventually built. Rather than a theme park typified by a massive golf ball, it was to be, according to Walt, the city of tomorrow that caters to the people as a service function. It will be a planned, controlled community, a showcase for American industry and research, schools, cultural, and educational opportunities. The original Epcot was to have been home to 20,000 residents. The city would have been built in the shape of a circle with residential areas along the perimeter and commercial areas at the center. Monorails and people movers, familiar transport devices at Disney's parks, would provide above-ground transportation for Epcot's residents, while auto traffic would be relegated to a network of underground tunnels. Though the plan appears quite ambitious, the original idea for Epcot doesn't sound so bad. It's exciting, in fact, a true vision of the future, right here in the present. But enthusiasm for the concept tends to wilt when Walt's more detailed description of the community is considered. Quote, "In Epcot, there will be no slum areas because we won't let them develop. There will be no landowners and therefore no voting control. People will rent houses instead of buying them and at modest rentals. There will be no retirees. Everyone must be employed." It doesn't sound so magical when it's put that way. One wonders how Disney would have enforced these policies and what the consequences would have been for breaking the rules. If a resident's income fell below a certain threshold, would they have to vacate their home? What if they got sick? What if they were injured? With no retirement age, these scenarios are not just speculation. They are likely possibilities. There would have been no property ownership, so there would never be any guarantee that a resident could be anything but a long-term guest. What if someone broke a law? Who would be in charge of enforcing those laws, and how much power would they have? Walt Disney died in 1966, 10 days after his 65th birthday. His brother, Roy O. Disney, took control of the company and refocused Epcot from town to theme park. It was opened in 1982, functioning more as an ongoing World's Fair than a futuristic suburb. Epcot was to have been a model community, one which other corporations could have emulated. And even though Walt's true vision for Epcot was never realized, the attempt was not without its benefits. In order for Walt to begin work on his futuristic community, he decided he needed a certain amount of autonomy to build this dream, an ironic notion when one considers the nature of that dream. In 1967, Walt was in the planning stages for Disney World, his second park after California's Disneyland. Walt secretly purchased the Florida swampland that Disney World and Epcot would one day stand on through a series of shell companies. In this way, he was able to acquire that land, a total of 27,400 acres, for a fraction of what it was worth, had people known what it was earmarked for. Once Walt had secured the parcel, he and his company lobbied the Florida government to create a special taxing district on which to build Disney World and Epcot. A special taxing district has all the authority of a local government but lacks any of the normal governmental constraints. It functions as an independent entity, which is exactly what Walt needed to begin construction on Epcot, a buffer, both physical and political. Walt's independent district became known as the Reedy Creek Improvement District, named after the waterway that winds through the area. Reedy Creek consists of Disney's various properties, unincorporated land, and two cities, Lake Buena Vista and Bay Lake, which have a population of 24 and 29 residents respectively, all of whom work on Disney property. Now, this next part concerns taxes, something which I admittedly don't have such a great handle on. I file my W-2 on time every year, and that's about as far as my knowledge extends. But stick with me. In a 2001 article for Prospect.org, journalist Joshua Schenck detailed the closed loop that Disney had set up for itself. Basically, Schenck showed how money and taxes paid to Reedy Creek by Disney were essentially handed right back to Disney. Schenck cites one particular example of this practice in Reedy Creek Energy Services, who manage the water and waste treatment for the entire district. Reedy Creek Energy is a subsidiary of Walt Disney World, contracted by the Reedy Creek Improvement District to perform these utility services. Essentially, Disney pays the Reedy Creek government for this service, but since Reedy Creek is just a handful of people who work for Disney, the money returns to its point of origin. Disney is basically contracting themselves. And no, this isn't illegal, but it is concerning. This lack of oversight enables Disney to do whatever they want with the land and services within Reedy Creek, and there can be no outcry from the residents because they work for the company. Where does this control end, and what kind of a precedent does it set? A private corporation holds complete sway over a vast public space. Their culture permeates every facet of life, and no one subjected to it can voice a concern for fear of losing their livelihood and maybe their home. Sounds more than a little dystopian to me. In April of 2022, the Florida legislature abolished the Reedy Creek Improvement District along with several other special districts formed prior to 1968. While it would be nice to assume that our governor, Ron DeSantis, was simply cracking down on Disney's unchecked power and forcing them to pay their fair share, his motivations seem less than noble. DeSantis is going after Disney because the company came out against the conservative-favored Parental Rights and Education Bill, infamously dubbed the Don't Say Gay Bill. The piece of legislation prohibits instruction on sexual orientation and gender identity for students in kindergarten through 3rd grade. But the abolition of Reedy Creek is no simple task. Once the bill goes into effect, the special district will be dissolved by June of 2023, and the debts and obligations of Reedy Creek, a figure north of $160 million, will then be assumed by the government of Orange County. Not surprisingly, Orange County doesn't have the funds to cover this staggering bill. Perhaps more government oversight for Disney could be a good thing, but it certainly isn't going to be good for Orange County. Despite the imminent dissolution of Reedy Creek, not surprisingly, the idea of a Disney-branded community persists and has been recently resurrected in the form of something known as story living by Disney. In 2022, Disney announced their plans for a master-planned home community called Cotino, which will be constructed in the Coachella Valley in Rancho Mirage, California. Though not much is known as of this recording, the story living aspect seems to be a series of curated experiences that only the residents of Cotino will have access to. In layman's terms, it seems that Cotino will be like living in a Disney park all the time. It is also not known if the lack of autonomy that Walt Disney envisioned for Epcot will go hand in hand with story living. But to ensure Cotino's population continues to be enamored of the Disney experience, it would stand to reason that a strict enforcement of rules would be in order. After all, they can't have residents peeking their heads behind the curtain. Who knows what they might see? No discussion about the dark side of Disney can be complete without at least some mention of their infamous 1946 film, Song of the South. The film was a combination of a live-action musical mixed with animation, and the story was based on an early collection of African-American folktales. Of course, those folktales were compiled by a white man named Joel Chandler Harris in an 1881 publication entitled Uncle Remus, His Songs and His Sayings. This book was the first of 6 volumes of Uncle Remus stories, the titular character generally serving as narrator and framing device. Harris wrote his books using his interpretation of a deep South African American dialect, which, in retrospect, is a deeply offensive caricature. Song of the South adapted the character of Uncle Remus into a plantation worker who befriends a boy named Johnny who visits his grandmother's plantation. Uncle Remus tells Johnny stories of Brer Rabbit, Brer Fox, and Brer Bear, a trio of animal characters who run afoul of one another. Johnny eventually learns how to deal with the challenges in his young life through Uncle Remus and the trickster tales he tells about the 3 animals. The irony should be obvious here, but I'll point it out anyway. Johnny's challenges, those of a white relative of a former plantation owner, paled in comparison to Uncle Remus's, a freed slave who had not been permitted to be truly free. True, Song of the South was set after the abolition of slavery, though the idea that former slaves would be happy to continue working for their former slave masters is an upsetting one. And it is also true that after the Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th Amendment were ratified, for many slaves, life did not change all that drastically. Just because it was illegal to own African Americans didn't mean that they weren't oppressed through other means and worked just as hard by many of the same people. For Song of the South to portray this era as anything but a nightmare was a slap in the face to the descendants of the people who lived through it. The film famously starred James Baskett in the role of Uncle Remus, a character that typified the unfortunate cinematic trope of the, quote, magic Negro. Now, this term came into use via acclaimed African-American director Spike Lee around 2001. He used it in response to movies like The Green Mile and The Legend of Bagger Vance, which both feature African-American characters disregarding their own needs to help the white characters cope with their superficial problems. Lee chose to use the term Negro rather than African-American, as he believed this word appropriately captured the stereotypical character device for what it was, an insulting and unfortunate reminder of the historical disenfranchisement of black people. James Baskett won an honorary Academy Award for his portrayal of Uncle Remus, the first African American to achieve that goal, but the award was still honorary, as Baskett was not permitted to compete with the other films chosen for consideration by the Academy that year. And one must wonder if the award was given for Baskett's considerable acting and singing talent, or if it was simply given to remind African Americans of the types of roles they were permitted to play in Hollywood. In 1992, Splash Mountain, a ride based on the cartoon portions of Song of the South, was opened at Orlando's Magic Kingdom, Anaheim's Disneyland, and Tokyo's Disneyland. Splash Mountain was a log flume ride that took passengers through a series of Uncle Remus stories, while James Baskett's rendition of Zippity-Doo-Dah, recorded for Song of the South, featured prominently. The ride culminates in a 52.5-foot drop, with passengers narrowly avoiding a collision with a briar patch. In 2020, in the wake of the George Floyd protests, Disney announced they would be retheming Splash Mountain after 2009's The Princess and the Frog. Executives claim that the plans to rebrand the ride had been in the works for almost 5 years by then, but work had not yet begun. And when that work is completed, another stain on Disney's past will be much easier to overlook. Likewise, Song of the South is not available on Disney's premier streaming platform, Disney+. When the not-so-magical side of Disney is brought up, some of the usual topics discussed include sexual imagery hidden in a large amount of their films, unfortunate deaths and the injuries at their parks, and the macabre practice of scattering the ashes of loved ones at the Magic Kingdom's Haunted Mansion. But there is one uncomfortable topic that seems to bother people far less than these, namely, how Disney treats its frontline employees. Their cast members. I suspect this delineation serves a twofold purpose, convincing hourly employees that they are actually part of this magical world, while at the same time avoiding the words, hourly employees. In this way, the worker is less frustrated with their pay because they're not just clocking in to pay their bills, they're part of the show. According to an expose written by a former and anonymous Disney World cast member and published by Thrillist.com in 2016, the most important job of a Disney worker is to, quote, keep the illusion of Disney alive. This, even despite the recent avalanche of articles detailing the abuse many cast members suffer at the hands of the guests. Spitting, cursing, sexual harassment, physical violence. It takes real dedication to Walt's dream to pretend that's not happening. According to the Thrillist article, in 2016, Disney cast members, i.e. the ones wearing the costumes, as well as any other hourly employee, were making anywhere from $6.90 to $8 an hour. Hardly a commensurate salary when the blistering Florida heat is taken into consideration, not to mention the 100-plus degree temperature inside the mascot suits. As of this recording, Disney has raised their hourly wage to $15, no small hike on the surface. But consider how that works out annually based on a 40-hour work week. According to MSN.com, as of December 2021, the average Disney cast member brings home a salary of $28,327 a year. My own calculations bring it closer to $31,000 a year, but that's before taxes are considered. So just over $28,000 seems a reasonable figure. Actually, allow me to pick a better adjective. It's an accurate figure. A salary below $30K is, by definition in 2022, unreasonable. But even if the pay is less than adequate, there's still the perks that go along with the job, namely free year-round admission to the parks. That's a savings of a little over $1,300 a year, which is the price tag of Disney's IncrediPass. This is the most expensive option when it comes to the annual Disney passes, but it entitles the holder to unlimited access to all 4 Orlando area parks with no blackout dates. It covers admission and parking, though all pass options cover parking. And as a Disney cast member, this is all included. So why wouldn't one want an all-access golden ticket to the most magical place on Earth? Well, it might be difficult to plan your free Disney vacation when requests for time off are seldom met with approval. The subject of Thrillist's expose cites examples of employees competing to see who could work the most overtime just to net themselves a decent paycheck. True, this was before the recent wage hike, but time off for holidays, health concerns, even weddings does not come easily. It seems that management believes employees should be content with putting their personal lives on hold for the ultimate glorification of the mouse. At its core, Disney, whether we're talking about the original Anaheim Park, the Magic Kingdom in Orlando, the animation company, or even the man himself, isn't that different from any other massively successful business. They just want to turn the biggest profit from the lowest investment. But Disney pretends they're different. Call me cynical, and I'm sure you will, but I believe anything or anyone claiming they are the be-all, end-all of innocence, wholesomeness, and family values is more than a little suspect. I grew up Catholic after all. I know firsthand when the mask of chaste morality seems nigh impenetrable, all it takes is the smallest of cracks. A quick glimpse beneath the surface bears out the suspicion. There's something squirming down there in the dark. Be it Walt's quasi-Nazi connections, the phalluses glimpsed in the background of The Little Mermaid, or the company's lack of concern with their employees putting food on the table, there's really nothing magical about Disney at all. It's just another corporate illusion, and a fantastically profitable one at that. I can hear you now, oh, you just stop and let us have some fun. I've heard it time and time again from my friends, most of whom are annual pass holders, and I get it. There's things in my life that I turn a blind eye to as well, just so I can enjoy them guilt-free. And far be it from me to stop anyone from having their fun. I just don't see the attraction. To me, Disney World is just a children's theme park built on unfairly pilfered swampland, right outside one of the worst cities in Central Florida, a few miles off the deadliest highway in America. And when it comes to the movies churned out by the Disney company, I see only recycled folktales and mythology injected with a sassy modern twist, to be enjoyed by the masses who conveniently gloss over the ruthless authoritarian streak in their beloved storyteller. And for anyone praising Disney's more recent attempts at political correctness, don't forget that the company censors its movies so as not to offend the Communist Party of China. The Chinese market is so lucrative, Disney doesn't bat an eye at tailoring their films for the government currently engaged in the genocide of their Turkish Muslim population. Somehow, in today's overly sensitive landscape, Disney has done more than survive its scandals, both past and present. They've thrived in spite of them. But despite their millions of adoring fans and a half-hearted attempt to drag their brand into the 21st century, at least as far as the Western world is concerned, this idea that Disney has anyone's interest but their own in mind is, well, it's an illusion. Or maybe we could call it a magic trick. Because if there's one thing Walt Disney knew inside and out, it was magic. I leave you, dear listener, with his words. There is no magic in magic. It's all in the details. This episode of Wasteland was researched, written, produced, recorded, edited, and in some areas, scored by me, Michael Paul Anthony. If you'd like to contact the show, the email address is wastelandpodfl@gmail.com. I want to thank you for listening, and if you like what you heard, please share it with a friend. Until next time.